So we've given you a lot of varieties of options and strategies that you can use to be able to try and get a turkey. But sometimes you have to play that chess game. You start off with a move that you think is going to work, and all of a sudden you say, my gut's telling me this isn't working. So what are some examples of why and when to change hunting strategies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's obviously duration of the day where the turkey behavior changes. We've mentioned this quite a bit. Turkeys might fly down, they might feed, and you're sitting in an area where they're not. So time passes by, let's say 10 or 11 o'clock rolls around, and the hens are going off to nest, and the toms are out there doing their thing. Well, there might be situations where you started off with the blind sit and wait strategy, nothing happened. Maybe nothing came into your calling or your decoying, and they've stayed in a neighboring field that you have permission to hunt. So at that point, you might have changed from the blind sit and wait strategy to more of a run and gun situation. You might ambush them, if you know where they want to be. That's where that strategy comes into play. There's other factors like weather. We haven't touched on this much yet, but maybe there's an increase in wind. You start off with a calm morning, birds are gobbling, everything's great, and a storm front's coming in. There's some high winds, for example. What do you do? Well, with the wind, it's important to keep this simple stuff in mind, but if these toms are wanting to strut and do their breeding type of behavior, then I've seen birds actually kind of get top heavy and almost topple over, from wind hitting their backs.
Yeah.
They're fanned out. And so they don't like that, and they're gonna move. They're gonna move into a different area, get out of the wind, and especially if they're dependent on their eyesight and there's a bunch of brush, blowing in the wind, that makes them nervous. That messes with them. They like stillness, so you might have started hunting high in an ideal blind situation, but now that the birds might want to be down in that valley. They might want to be down in that creek bottom. They might, any place that's going to keep them out of that weather and that wind. So there's all kinds of different variables and different situations where you're going to want to change your strategy.
Yeah, and speaking of weather changes, like rain, for example, a lot of times after a rain, birds, for whatever reason, go straight to the fields. It doesn't always happen, but it happens enough that I would say it's worth relying on.
Yeah.
So you're hunting deep woods or something like that, where it borders a field, it's raining, you're sitting in there and you're like,
That's a
man,
great point.
don't think this is going to work out, but this rain's supposed to pass in about 30 minutes. It might be a good time for you to, scoot out to the field edge and set up a decoy and blind strategy at that point and be ready for those birds once the rain stops.
It's magic sometimes, like you said, where you have a front come in, it's nasty weather, and then the weather breaks. And one of my favorite moments at that time is when the sun comes out. Those toms, man, they might want to sun themselves. You got fresh bugs and worms and all kinds of new feed out in those fields, and sometimes they just hammer it.
Yeah, and you may be hunting in a blind on the edge of the field and have a tom out there that you've been watching for an hour and a half, and he's not going to come to your calls. He's waiting for that hen to come to him. So that might be a good time to say, okay, I'm going to get out, crawl on my belly out to my decoy, get that fan off, and try and reap him.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's really important to start off with a game plan, have a good game plan in mind, but don't be afraid to think about it and play that chess game, which is the most fun part of turkey hunting, in my opinion, and be willing to make a change in your strategy and be able to make a move on that bird.